All right, thanks, guys. Sound-wise, we're good? All right, good deal. Well, and thank you for inviting me. It's a privilege. This is my second time I've been able to be in Dublin, and that number is not high enough. It needs to be higher. So, I don't know the Dublin Jug well. Is anybody here for the first time tonight? Okay, the rest of you either don't like putting your hand up or you come regularly. That's good. I also run a Jug-like group in Denver, where I'm from in the US. It's technically called the Denver Open Source User Group. I affectionately refer to it as DJUG South, because there is a Denver Jug proper that kind of meets up on the north end of town. We're on the south end of town, and it's kind of a jug, so it's a good thing. Anyway, I've got a couple of talks tonight. You should have, hopefully you got a GitHub sticker, an Octocat. There's a bunch of them lying around. And there are some Paddy Power batteries and scarves to give away. And after my Gradle talk, I have a copy of my most recent Gradle book. Not going to take you a long time to read. We'll figure out some mechanism to give that away, and I'll sign it if you're into that kind of thing. But it's not going to make the book more valuable. But first, is there anybody here who identifies as a product owner? I guess we should get that out of the way first. Yes, one in the back. Okay, well, we apologize for any inconvenience. Okay, all right. How long of a train ride is that, or did you drive?
I drove just under 2 hours.
Okay, that's not so bad.
No, not so bad.
Okay. That's Denver to Fort Collins, where I live.
I was actually in Denver 2 weeks ago. Could have hooked up then.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, perhaps I should explain. The title of this talk comes from one of the lesser-known Shakespeare histories, Henry VI, Part 2. Now, a lot of people, at least a lot of English speakers, know Henry V. That's one of the more popular histories. It's got some really, big scenes in it, big lines, and, this really amazing king who was just this leader of men and, led England in battle to victory over France, and everybody loved him. Henry VI, the king didn't quite do as well, and frankly, the play didn't quite do as well. It's not bad, but it's just kind of less well known. It comes in 3 parts, and in part 2, it's recounting actual events that took place in the late 1400s in the life of Henry VI, this real English king. And that king was kind of weak. Okay, he was beset by nobles. There were these warring nobles that were kind of nipping at his heels. And in the play, his wife is unfaithful to him with one of those nobles, so he's just like that much more pathetic. And there was this peasant rebellion during his reign. This is real. This happened, I think it was like in about 1485, something like that. It was a rebellion led by a man named Jack Cade. And I don't know how much English history. I know when I'm speaking to U.S. audiences, they're like, Jack Cade, there is one, There was a king called Henry. I don't know. I don't know if you guys know this, but it was a moderately successful peasant rebellion. He actually kind of mustered an army and captured part of London and everything. And in the play, there's a point where he's a bad guy in the play. He's a minor bad guy. He's expounding his vision. He's explaining to the people why they should support him. And it was sort of this, I kind of read it as like a proto-Maoist sort of thing. He was talking about how there's not going to need to be any money, and I'll give everybody all the food they want, and I'll apparel them all from my livery, and all may agree as brothers and worship me as their Lord. That was sort of his vision, which sounds like a good deal if you're going to be a peasant king. And his main henchman was Dick the Butcher. Dick the Butcher is listening to this, and he said, he's like, oh yeah, that's great. But the first thing we do to make this work, let's kill all the lawyers. And Cade is like, yeah, okay, we're going to do that. So that line survives as a quote. I've heard it before. The first, let's kill all the lawyers, and it's lawyer jokes are cheap, right? They're automatically funny if they're violent, and everybody sort of agrees. Now the irony is in the play, this is really accidentally a pro-lawyer sentiment, right? The bad guy is saying to get away with our villainy, we have to get rid of lawyers. So now Cade's rebellion failed. It didn't really go very far. We, on the other hand, I think, are kind of at the tail end of what has been a successful rebellion over the last decade or so. And that's this, not rebellion necessarily, but revolution in the introduction of agile methods and just these ideas that we put under the heading of the A word, what we call agile software development. That stuff 10 or almost 11 years ago now was kind of codified in the Agile Manifesto, and that made a big splash, and a lot of us, probably a lot of you in this room, have spent part of the last decade advocating for some of those ideas in your workplace. 10 years ago, that was really hard. 5, 6 years ago, it was still kind of hard. Now I work with people now, I work for GitHub, where I can't even really say the word agile without getting chuckles. We're kind of post-agile hipsters. It's not a movement or a word or anything like that we would embrace. But you know what? That's just because it's been successful. A lot of the ideas that were revolutionary 10 years ago are now assumed. You know, do you write tests first? Well, of course you write tests first. I mean, what kind of person do you think I am? You know, do we ship often? Do we do things iteratively? Of course. You know, you're never going to be heads down coding for 6 months before anybody sees the project. I mean, that's a given. Okay, so a lot of the values that this revolution gave to us, whether you still like to use the word or not, they've been successful. All right, it's left its mark. Other ideas like, and processes. A lot of the people who participated in the writing of the original manifesto went on to kind of write their own book about their own agile software process, and certain of those became more successful than others. You take a very common enterprisey corporate process now, like Scrum. It's easy to pick on Scrum. I would do it all the time. Trust me, it's easy. I do it a lot. So something like Scrum that has this idea of a rigid iteration schedule and this idea of stories. You know, we don't write big long functional specs anymore. We just write these little stories that kind of talk about how people use products. And it's a great idea. But let's kind of talk about that a little bit, see how those things work. One of these notions we've gotten from this agile revolution. So how do stories get written? How do stories get written? Well, there's a person, usually, a person who's given responsibility for making sure that gets done, and that's this poor sap here that I've got my sights on, the product owner. All right, what does the product owner do? Well, the product owner somehow gets the stories written. Different organizations are going to have a different account of how that works, but this person is responsible for making sure they get written and then sorted and put into a backlog. Stories get written, stories go into a backlog, and that backlog is, in my mind, it's a data structure. It's an ordered queue. And they go in one end and they're sorted in priority, and then I, kind of with my developer hat, can just walk up to that thing when I'm doing sprint planning, and I can pluck a story out of this data structure. I can remove an element from this queue, and I know what I'm supposed to work on next. Simple enough, right? Now that's an improvement over the way things used to happen. I think if you compare that to sort of the waterfall whipping boy of years past and big, thick functional specs, I mean, guys, I've written those before. All right, I never want to see the specs I've written. My spec prose was brutal. It was just bad, dehumanizing. But, and this idea of stories, keeping things short and this priority backlog and everything was an improvement, humanizing, more efficient. It was good, but I think there's a problem. I think this is symptomatic of some ideas that are implicit in a process like Scrum and in some of the agile concepts that we've embraced, and implicit in the way our organizations are designed. I think there are some ideas here that are bad that we need to get rid of. Now, I'm just a few minutes in here. We've got a lot to talk about still, but I'm going to give away the ending. I'm going to tell you what my vision is. I'm not going to build it up. Here's what I think should happen. All right. In my world, I think developers, and that's N-1 of us, okay? I only saw one hand who when I asked who was a product owner, so I'm assuming the rest of you are developers, and I'll go ahead and lump myself in that category. We should be the ones who know the business that we work in. We should learn our own product domain, for real. We should care about that as much as we care about the engineering practices that we're otherwise passionate about. We should relate to customers. Now that word is ambiguous, that word relate. I don't mean saying, you think of your customer and you go, wow, yeah, I know, using our software really sucks, huh? that's one kind of relating. I don't mean that. I mean like actually engage in relationship with customers, like talk to them. You should love the people that you're serving, that love the people for whom you are creating tools. You're trying to make software that makes their life better. And that person's life, the quality of that person's life, should be a first-class concern for you. This is what I think. I think we should own these ideas. There's a lot to unpack. So let's see why you won't just take my advice. Now, maybe everybody agrees. I'm looking at your faces. I think I see some of you buy it, some of you I think don't. So why not just go home or fast forward to the next talk we're going to do and do what I say? Well, probably you're thinking of some reasons why this isn't going to apply to you. Now, I've talked to people before about these ideas, and I've actually been able to engage in conversation with developers about these ideas, and I've gotten some feedback. So let's look at round one of what your excuses might be, of why this won't work. Maybe you're thinking that, well, the people on my team just don't care. You're thinking, I care. This is really inspirational. I'd really like to get behind what my company's doing, or the tools, but I know these other people I work with, they just don't care. Or maybe you think, well, the people on my team, we're just too busy, just got too much to do. All right, we're trying to be good at shipping features and improving our engineering practices, and I work in this really complex business domain. There's just too much to know. I can't do it. So maybe that's it. Maybe you think, the domain is too hard. I hear this usually from people who aren't developers, who say that, well, we do, this is a property leasing business, and it doesn't sound hard, but man, it's hard. The domain's just too complex. Developers aren't going to learn. I love this. Developers are not smart enough to learn the domain. That's a good one. And there's more, okay? And we'll talk about more excuses later. Yeah, you have.
What's the easy excuse? You have 2 customers or 3 customers, and all of the customers want to have it different. So if I have my product owner and just have my product owner say, make them have one thing they really want, and if they solve that, then bring it to me as a dev so I can do it for them.
So yeah, so you have different customers, and I'll repeat for the recording, different customers with different requests. And now you're saying there's one person who gets to prioritize and make that decision. So that's a special case of there are more things to do than you have time to do.
Not the thing. I mean, the one wants to have it blue, the other one wants it red, and the third one wants to have it...
Oh, okay. So simply competing, contradictory demands that people have, right?
I don't want to do that for them because I can...
You need a way...
something while they are discussing.
You need a way to make that decision, right? To make a decision about what you're going to do, because you can't do contradictory things. You have to make a choice, and more generally than that, you also have to prioritize. There's lots of things to do, and you have to figure out what's most important. But sometimes that means saying no to one person, saying yes to another. And we'll talk about that some more later, about saying I want to outsource that to this other party. We'll look at what the implications of that are. So if you're thinking of more excuses, and excuses is such an ugly word, more good principled reasons why I'm wrong and you're right. Don't worry, we'll have a chance to talk about some more later. We'll take a second pass at these. But I want to focus on for a minute about the idea that learning your domain is too cognitively expensive. Let's just take that. All right, it's too hard. You can't do that and be good at the other stuff you're doing. Well, think for a moment about the kind of people we are and the kind of things that we do that we consider fun and not hard. What do we do for hobbies? Now, we're a very diverse crowd. There's lots of kinds of things that emerge. I'd be willing to bet that I have a different view of this. I'm kind of thinking of American hobbies, and there could be some different things here. But, I know a lot of geeks who are into digital photography. Back when photography was on film, it wasn't, it was on emulsion. It wasn't a particularly popular hobby among developers. Once it became digital and computers were involved, like everybody I know was a digital photographer. So that's really hard to do well. Plenty of us don't do it all that well, but that's a technically challenging and artistically challenging hobby. I know a lot of home brewers. Maybe that's an American thing. Is that a thing in Ireland? Do we? Yeah. Good. Okay. I knew I felt at home here. Yeah, that's not easy to do well. That can be really complex. I know, and this is partially based on the fact that I live in a mountainous part of the U.S., I know a lot of mountain climbers. That's very difficult, and it's a good way to die. Physical electronics. And hardware hacking, that's a thing now. When I was a little boy, this was a hobby of mine. I wasn't all that good at it, but it was possible because components were big and all, through hole, and like a human being could solder them. And then everything became surface mount, and this stopped being a hobby that people could do. And then Arduino happened, and all these other kind of componentized hardware hacking things happened. This is tough. This doesn't require you just to be a programmer, but also an electrical engineer and kind of a physical craftsman and all kinds of interesting things. It's a hard hobby. I know a lot of people who are into electronic dance music. That requires a certain amount of technical skill, some music theory, some creativity. These are weird things that geeks do for fun. And there are other things. And think about the way you feel when you're doing your hobby, whatever it is. And maybe you're thinking, well, gee, my hobby is not all that intellectually demanding. I tie flies or something. And that's actually pretty hard too. We could talk about why. Probably what you do is pretty demanding. And how do you feel when you do it, when you do this fun hobby thing, okay? The people on your team, whoever you want to think about them as being, you're energized, right? It's stuff you want to do. Nobody has to tell you to go spend time doing it. You're automatically, intrinsically motivated to do it. You want to be really good at it. It's a thing that you're automatically driven to excel at, probably. Your hobby is probably the kind of thing that you really have to push yourself to do more. You don't complain when an opportunity comes up to spend time doing it. So why is that? Why do the people on your team, or maybe you, why do you feel the way you do about your hobby, your avocation, but not about your work? So it's possible for you to be motivated to really want to excel at some difficult thing and spend time doing it, but you don't care as deeply about the work you do for money. In other words, why do you not want to own your product domain? Well, this is really a talk that talks a little bit about how things work in the company I work for, GitHub. And I want to describe a little bit about the way we think about this problem. And really what I'm telling you is a story about how one organization solves this problem. It's not hypothetical. I'm not saying, I bet there's a company that could work this way. I'm saying, I work there, and to some degree, we get some of this right. So I want to talk about that. And after I'm done, then we'll go through round 2 of, what did I say? I said, principled reasons why you disagree with me / excuses for why this can't apply to your company. So we'll go through all that next. And there's a book that's very important to us at GitHub that's kind of a little bit of a philosophy of how we operate. That book is this one, Drive by Daniel Pink. Anybody read that here? No? One in the back? Yeah, okay. Really, really good book. I don't think it's perfect. I think Pink makes some points that I disagree with a little bit. But the thrust of his book is about what motivates people doing creative work, or what we might loosely call knowledge workers. Now, Pink differentiates between what motivates human beings when they're doing repetitive work and what motivates human beings when they're doing creative work. He does a really good job. He doesn't create some kind of dichotomy like creative work is the good stuff and repetitive work is the bad, boring stuff. He just says, look, people are motivated in different ways. If you're doing repetitive work, then kind of the traditional rational economic motivations dominate. If you're doing piecework, you're punching holes in a piece of leather and you get paid per hole that you punch. Well, if you get paid more, you'll maybe punch more holes. You'll be motivated to punch more holes. Very simple. But he says when you're doing creative work or knowledge work or anything that the people in this room do, there are 3 factors that describe your motivation. All 3 of these factors need to be present for you to be motivated. And the cool thing is, nobody has to cause that motivation to take place. I was talking about hobbies because you're intrinsically motivated to pursue those things. Nobody has to tell you. You just want to. There are 3 factors that Pink argues are required to preserve that intrinsic motivation. They are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's just dig into those a little bit. Pink, see, his book, it's on airport bookshelves, and it's kind of a pop sociology business book. in that category. It's not hard to read, and it's not rigorously scientific, but it's making what I think is a persuasive argument about the nature of human beings. It really is a book of anthropology. It's saying people are a certain way. People are intrinsically motivated to create things when these three factors are present. Let's talk about autonomy. So, for me to say I have autonomy, basically what that means is I am free to choose with whom I work, what I work on, and how I get that work done. So, the company I work at, I'm free to some degree to select a team that I work on. Now, my job is to be a trainer. I teach people how to use GitHub and how to use Git and how to do other related things because I really, really like doing that. And so, I'm organized on this team of other people who are trainers. I suppose I could shift careers and I could become something else. I could say, really what I want to be good at is ops. And so I'll try and make some time to go work on ops things because operations is a passion of mine. And over time, if I made that transition and the ops people were like, wow, yeah, Tim, we really need you. You're really kicking butt here. You're helping out a lot. And, you got somebody to replace you over in training just so you're not hurting those guys. Okay, you could go work with those people now. Nobody would stop me from doing that. If I needed a helper on a training gig, let's say the opportunity came up to go someplace cool like Dublin. Honestly, my friends are jealous. And I said, well, I need somebody to come with me. Nobody's going to assign that helper. I would just go find somebody. We'd agree on who would go. Moreover, if another opportunity came up and it was at a time of the year that I didn't like to travel, like December, I like to try to stay home because I like Christmas and it snows and I like to be around and there's parties and stuff like that. So I try to find reasons not to travel. I'm not going to work on any remote training engagements in December. And nobody would stop me from doing that. That's just kind of, I have that freedom to do that. You have a question?
Who would do the training then?
Who would do that training then? Well, somebody else would maybe not care if they travel in December. Maybe they like that. And that's actually the case. And if nobody wanted to do it, suppose it was
24th of?
Yes, the 24th of December. Nobody would do that. No, that wouldn't get done. And so that's business that we would not sell. And that's ultimately the answer there. Same thing would work with developers. If a customer asks for a feature that is not consistent with the development team's vision or is very boring and painful to write, or some combination of the two, the work might not get done. So that's a real implication there. There isn't anybody saying that work has to get done because we have to have autonomy to decide what we work on. Also, how I work. Nobody is going to tell me that I have to use PowerPoint. I mean, seriously, nobody's going to tell me that. Nobody's going to tell me that I have to use Keynote. We have a variety of solutions. This presentation right now, I happen to do in Keynote. There are other presentations we do with Jekyll and Reveal.js in this framework called Hide Slides. If I want to build a presentation with that, I can. If the developers want to use a particular IDE or text editor or anything like that, there'd be no chance anybody would dictate that sort of thing. You're free to choose how you work. Is there anybody who has to use a particular IDE? Like, are there any compulsory Eclipse users here? It's okay. If it's painful, you don't have to put your hands up. Yeah. See, it happens. And, maybe you make your peace with Eclipse. That's possible. I've done it before, too. But that would be an example of a company saying, well, we're not going to trust you to make a decision about how you get your work done. You're going to get your work done in this particular way. Let's talk about mastery. So as creative people, we naturally want to be good at the things that we do. We want to become good at these things. And Pink is arguing we have to be free to become good at these things. That desire to master the subject matter, master the work that we do, has to have an outlet. That can't go unfulfilled for us to maintain our intrinsic motivation. We want to build things that are beautiful. And again, this is just an argument. This is an anthropological argument about the nature of human beings. One might disagree, but I'm saying I think the kind of people that we are, the kind of creatures that we are, we want to build beautiful things. Now, this might be something that's beautiful in terms of its internal construction. Now, suppose you get a feature to work, right? You picked the story off of the story queue that the product owner gave you and you coded it. And it's hard to build a new thing. And you don't always build it right the first time. Kind of maybe you get it working and limping along and you realize, oh, the implementation was stupid. And now that you kind of see the problem, you realize you have to refactor it. I mean, that's very typical. I usually don't write the right thing the first time. But the boss says, oh, it doesn't matter, it works, you have to ship it. There's no time to refactor. We can't do that. We got to move on to the next feature. I see. Okay, so little piece of me dies, and I know I have to ship something ugly. It could be something, I think we want beauty in external presentation. If you write software that has a user interface, you might not. I mean, you might just like process messages on some queue or something, and that's, nobody sees anything. But if you build something that's got a user-facing interface, you want that to be beautiful, even if it's an internal tool. So tell me if you've been told this before. Oh, it's okay if the UI is ugly. It's an internal tool. Let's just go ahead and ship it. We can't afford a designer on this. Why? Well, because this is just for other people who work here. And we know they don't expect much. Right, that's the message. That's the message. If you're not allowed to dedicate the resources to make something beautiful, then the implied message is the people here, these coworkers of yours that you're serving by building internal tools, they don't need good things. They can have garbage. Now, building garbage is not something you want to do. Somebody has to threaten you to get you to do that. Implicitly threatened with losing your job, right? Do it, or what are you going to do? Rebel? They said I didn't have time to make the UI beautiful, and I can't go Shanghai a designer from over there and make him help out over here, because he's busy on that thing, and his boss told him to do that thing, and I can't make him do the thing I want to help me make this thing beautiful. If I do that, I'll get fired. All right, so there's an implied threat, as if a threat of violence here, that makes you ship ugly things. Otherwise, you'd never do it. It takes a threat to get you to ship garbage. That's the kind of person that you are. And hey, that's a flattering thought. Right? If you think I'm right about this, you are intrinsically the sort of person who would rather build something beautiful. You have to be made not to do it. Now, let's talk about Pink's third plank, and that's purpose. It feels to me like a somewhat youthful motivation or youthful phrase to say, what do I want in my work? Well, I want to change the world. And that's normally college undergraduates, thinking that sort of thing late at night. Everybody, by the time they're more than a few years into their career, you get that beaten out of you, right? You really don't think you're going to change the world. You just kind of want to get through the week, pay your bills, keep your boss off your back. You're kind of ground down. You don't really think about changing the world anymore. But you still do. That's the thing. Maybe the expression of this sentiment changes between the time you're 20 and the time you're 40, but you still want your work to be connected to something bigger than you. Some purpose bigger than the end of your day. That's deeply unfulfilling when you know all you're doing is moving the sticky note from this part of the chart to this part of the chart. You move from the in progress column to the ready to test column. Is that it? You just move a sticky note. You really want it to be something bigger than that. And, it doesn't need to be disconnected from the bottom line. I think you at least want the stuff you work on to make money for the company. That's a kind of purpose. If you like the company you work for, you don't mind if it's a commercial product. If it is profitable, that's something. So don't feel like that's somehow some base motivation. But ultimately, you want the thing you do to help people. You'd like it to make somebody's life better. And if it makes their life better enough that they pay money for it, well, that's great too. The real word here, I think, is a word that often has spiritual connotations. Can or can't, that's up to you. Doesn't need to or may, but the word is transcendence. You want something connected. You want your work connected to something that goes beyond your body and an inch outside your body, something in the world out there. And just coding the next story card is not that. And if you want people to do pointless things that they know are pointless and are not connected to any purpose out in the world, you'd better be prepared to offer them a bonus or threaten them with losing their job in order to get them to do that. Nobody is going to get out of bed in the morning excited to do something that is purposeless. So, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, those are, I would argue, 3 planks of intrinsic motivation. And with those things, I have the potential to actually have a drive of my own to get work done. So why don't your developers love what they do? Why don't you in your job? Well, maybe, why doesn't your team want to get on board? Maybe you're stopping them. So I think they'd want to take ownership of their product domain if you'd let them. I think you agree. I think you suspect this is true. Maybe you're still thinking there are some reasons this won't work for my organization. You're saying, yeah, okay, Tim, this is how you do it at GitHub, and developers can say no, they don't want to build a feature, and the feature doesn't get built. I've seen it happen. I can say, no, I don't want to travel there at that time, and I don't have to, and that's just how it goes. Now, trust me, the training team gets a lot of work done. We do a lot of traveling. We teach a lot of people. We're busy because we love doing it. But nobody makes me do any particular thing. Maybe you're thinking, great, that's GitHub. That's some San Francisco fantasy land. It won't work for my company because, and we have round 2 of, I'll say objections. That's a much kinder word. So let me just ask you, and I'm going to repeat what you say for the recording. Why does this work for us, but it can't work in your company? Why do you think?
I'm not going to say that it can't work.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a question.
All right, ask a question. Good.
It's application in a startup.
Ah.
So from scratch,
Yes.
with a perceived product need and funding, backing the delivery of a product to
Okay.
fulfill
So
and meet that product
A
need.
startup with
How do you
perceived product
define
need
that sort of environment?
and funding there. I'm gonna come back to the startup question. I actually think you have the most hope of making this work in a startup. I think the thornier question for me is I work in a 1,000-person company with entrenched traditions and power structures, and how do I go from there to this vision? I think in a startup you can do just fine. You can really decide to embrace this vision and just do it. And by the time you're 200 people, it's a struggle to stay there. It's hard to scale to that level. It's not impossible, but at 5 people, 10 people, 2 people, whatever it is, 20 people, this is very doable in a startup. The real hard question, and don't ask yet, is how do I convert my big company into this? So we'll get to that. Any other, why does this work for GitHub? Why not me?
Well, if your company, it's not a technological company.
Yeah. Specifically, not a technology company, or one of my favorites is we make developer tools. Every developer in the world who's any good is automatically their own product owner for development tools. That's GitHub's product right now, is tools to help software developers be better at writing software. So we build tools that make us better at writing software. it's built in, right? So on the one hand, this is an easy win for us. And I have to acknowledge that it is easy for us to be our own product owners in this domain. There's a couple other companies I can think of. Valve, another US company, they make video games, the Steam engine and all the games on that. Well, not too hard to find programmers who like to play video games. Pretty clean kill. There's another company that is about an hour away from where I live. I'm going to be teaching a workshop there later this month called SparkFun. Did anybody know? Is SparkFun a thing here? No? Okay. They make hardware hacking stuff. They make little electronic circuit kits. And they're managed very much like this. The design engineers at SparkFun, how do they decide what product to build? Well, they come up with something. And if they want to build it, they build it. They make it a kit. They are their own product owners. Now, this is the low-hanging fruit of this task. Software, hardware, video games, because the people who can do the engineering on these things automatically do the engineering on these things, or in the case of games, just do with a high degree of comorbidity. So yeah, we've blazed the easy trail. If you're not a technology company, I still think this is possible. And I'll talk a little bit, I'll develop a little bit more about why. Basically, though, what I'm asking is, if you work for an insurance company, if your business is insurance, I'm asking developers to decide to love insurance. Now, maybe they can't do that. Like, maybe you have a principled objection to insurance. Maybe you think insurance is evil. That's possible, okay? I know there are groups of people in the world who think it's unethical. What's that?
It's worse. It's boring.
It's boring. Okay. Well, if you actually think it's wrong, then don't work there. You can't do that. I'll get you in a second. You can't convince yourself to be excited about something that you think is wrong. If you think it's boring, I'm saying, well, I don't know if it really is. I'm wondering if the organization isn't designed in such a way to sap any motivation you might have to do that thing. I mean, do you have freedom to decide what you're going to do and how you're going to do it? Or do you get told those things? If you get told those things, then what happens is you decide, this isn't stuff I want to do. This is stuff I'm doing because somebody's going to beat me if I don't do it. And that's not fun. That's not what you get out of bed in the morning for. Now, I'm going to pick on insurance. I think it's a great example. It's a complicated domain. I don't know much about it. There's lots of different kinds of insurance. Typically, though, I mean, think about it. When somebody, take the consumer insurance case. When somebody's filing an insurance claim, is that a good day? No. No, it's either like mild inconvenience on the low end, like, oh, dang it, somebody crumpled my car, to life-scale tragedy on the bad end. Now, what if you could create tools somehow that made that process suck less? There's vision there. That's something you could decide to love. Now, maybe you can't. Maybe you still can't talk yourself into it. If you can't possibly love it, it's the wrong thing for you to do. You have to find something that and maybe, you have to do some convincing and some rethinking of the situation. But if you cannot possibly ever fall in love with that work you do, it's not work you're motivated to do. More likely, you've been convinced to fall out of love with that work by the way the organization is structured. You had a question or a comment?
I mean, Timothy Ferriss already says so. If you want to sell a product, be one of the customers of that product. So that's easy. The problem I see is just there are people that really know the topic very exactly.
Yes.
So what you say is, know as much as they know, plus be able to code. So the question on that is, when it's possible to know as much as they know, plus be able to code, why aren't they coders? Mm-hmm. Because then it's easy. So why? Because they spend all the time they have to learn how the insurance works.
Right.
We spend all the time we have to know how coding works. And that connection is, so the decision should be done by the person who knows most about that. So if I as a coder say, who's I give F on that thing?
Yeah.
He says, well, then other people die. So that's why he should say, do that because we need it.
So
Let
me summarize that. There are people who know lots and lots and lots about the domain. I'm saying we, who are specialists in coding, also need to know lots about the domain. And so if it's possible to do both, why aren't the existing product owners also developers? Now, I kind of summarize this under the phrase, what do we do with all those product owners after this transition has happened? It's a good thing we never asked that about blacksmiths, right? Now, maybe it was a bummer for blacksmiths during the transition. I'm not sure, and that's nothing to make light of. But let's work through this for a second. Now, most product owners who are not developers may not become developers. That may not be a thing that they're interested in. It may not be a thing they have a lot of aptitude in. It takes a little bit of, I think, mental weirdness to be good at what we do. We definitely have a different take on the world, particularly those of us who write business software, because that's this incredibly complex mapping of the mental world, the weird things people do, the network of human relationships that constitute a business. We can kind of perceive that and map that onto these incredibly simple rules that we program into, various elaborations on the Turing machine. So we make that mapping. That's what business software is all about. That's a weird skill set. So we have that. And some product owners may be interested in coding, some may not. Really, I think if I had a magic wand and I could wave the magic wand and tomorrow everybody would be doing things this way and we had all these product owners out of work, Not a chance would they be out of work. Because tomorrow, after I've waved my magic wand and everybody agrees with me and everybody's organization is trying to restructure to be the way I want, well, now I'm this developer and I need to learn some stuff. Okay? I need to be coached in how to do all these really hard product owner things. I need to be coached in how to interact with customers. I need to learn specific things about a domain. I need somebody to go ask. So that's a difficult transition. And yes, part of my mind has to be given over to that domain now. Does that mean, since I'm talking to customers, I'm studying insurance, I'm learning all this other stuff, that maybe I have less time to code? Yes. The time doesn't come, and the mental capacity doesn't come from nowhere. It's not like we're all being 40% lazy and we need to take that 40% mental slack and use that to love our product domain. No. You better believe we might have less time to write code. Part of the argument I'm making is that this will make us better at making the decisions about what code to write. Does it mean there need to be more developers? I don't know. I don't know how the economics of that shake out. We would just have to see. But yes, absolutely, part of me has to be given over to this, and I absolutely have to rely on the guy yesterday who was the dedicated product owner. Now he's this amazing coach type of person who has to help me be good at that. And all kinds of exceptions. You might say, well, there are people who want to protect their fiefdom and they don't want to help other people be good and they want to keep knowledge. Yeah, of course, there's dysfunction in the world all over the place. But yesterday's product owners become tomorrow's coaches of all of these mini distributed product owners. That's, I think, the right thing to do. And do the economics of software development change? Sure. I think they become more efficient. We'd have to see. Yes, sir. Jean-Pierre.
What is the largest sized company where you have seen this practice?
Okay. So I'm being recorded, and you're going to ask me to give the size of Valve. And I am a little shaky on this. I think it's in the 500E range, but somebody's Googling already to check that. I do know there are a couple of technology companies in the 200-person range that live like this, and that's SparkFun and GitHub as of tonight. There are approximately 200 people. So, and the funny thing about size is we used to be told, before I joined the company when it was 20 people, well, you guys do this now. It's not going to work when you're, or when we were 10. It's not going to work when you're 20. And they say, well, yeah, okay, it works now. It's not going to work when you're 50. It's not going to work when you're 20, when you're 75, 100, 150, 200. The goalposts keep moving. And to be sure, growth is hard here. And if you listen to the SparkFun guys talk about this process, they have had to be intentional about how to grow and how to maintain this aspect of their culture. It isn't automatic. The tendency in everybody's professional experience is lots of process, lots of hierarchy. That's a very human impulse. And so as you grow, problems come up and you think, boy, if there was a manager, we'd know how to do this. We can fix this problem if you just have a management hierarchy. And so that's a constant temptation to avoid. So I don't know precisely the largest company that does this. It's in the hundreds, not the 10,000s. I know that. Yes, sir.
How do you maintain a unity of vision and a unity of purpose so that people aren't working at cross purposes?
Man, that's a good question. Okay, unity of vision and purpose. My answer to that, and this kind of gets into territory where in the world I'd like to live in, I wish there were a bunch of companies answering that question and I could go interview them and figure out how they did it. And I'd see lots of different good answers and some bad answers. I'll tell you one I know works. I do think a company does need visionary leadership. And so this isn't an utterly flat authority is evil sort of system. What I'm saying is, particularly product owners professionalizing that role and taking that work away from developers, and generally lots of management hierarchy are probably the wrong approach. Some kind of implicit hierarchy, humans and groups do that. Nothing you can do about it. It's just how the world is, so don't hate. Certainly having explicitly maybe owners or board members appointed by owners, they should certainly be able to set vision for the company, and they should, ideally be people. and I can say this of my job, the people who do that at GitHub, I want to follow the vision they expound. I mean, that to me seems like the right thing to do. I'm voluntarily submit to that vision. But I think that is necessary. It's really funny, I gave this talk recently over in Norway, and somebody tweeted that I was a Marxist, which made me laugh a little. As it turns out, I'm not one. So, yeah, a company could still be privately owned, and the owners of that property could, appoint managers to say this is going to be what the vision is, or the owners might say this is the thing that we want to get done. Go do it. Go figure out how. Go love what you're doing. I think that's great. Questions are wonderful, by the way. Keep them coming. I'll talk if you don't have them. But
Did you saw big companies or companies with hundreds of employees, not technological companies,
sure.
where your principles are applied not as a company-wide policy, but as in islands?
In islands. So big companies. Let me reshape your question a little bit. If you got a big company, what do you do? Now, how do you make this happen in a big company? This is the same question that was asked about Agile 8 years ago. I love that, but the company doesn't embrace that vision, so what do I do? And the answer has always been, form a little island where you can do it. So you have to get buy-in from some nearby ally in management who will create kind of some cover, maybe some director level person who keeps everybody else away from you and gives you space to create a little island of autonomy. Is it a good example? Does it work? Can you replicate that stuff outside the company? That's always the idea. Create this little place where you can get good results and move out from there. Now, watching the clock here. Speaking of the things people used to say about Agile, I'm kind of saying this is a next step evolution of that process. Automated testing 13 years ago. I don't know if you were around, but certainly developers did not write tests back then. There were specialized professionals for that. It'd be way too expensive for developers to spend that time. There are QA staff that write tests. This argument is over. Maybe you're not proud of your test suite. Maybe you don't have the testing game you think you should have. But nobody argues about this anymore, okay? If you don't write tests, you think you should. This is done. It's now accepted that developers write tests. More recently with ops, around this time, I was pretending to be what we called back then a system administrator. I was not especially good at it, so I certainly believed at the time developers can't do ops. There are specialized sysadmins for that. And those admins, maybe they write their little Perl scripts or whatever, but they can't really code. That's what developers are for. Well, now we have DevOps, which is really a fusion of these things. A DevOps professional is a software developer whose domain is systems. That's a kind of software development. And the domain they're passionate about is systems and deployment and servers and things like that. Now, this isn't widespread yet. This is still an elite practice. But we're not so much having the argument. We're kind of figuring out how to implement this. But the idea that, well, you need a professional. Developers couldn't do that. We've heard it before, and we still hear it again. So a lot of what Agile has given us has been a lot of engineering practices, things like testing and things like iteration, that help us build things better. And they really have been good. They make us better at writing software. But they haven't really addressed the question of what to build. What software should we build? And that's what I'm getting at. And that's the scope of this vision. It's not about product owners. It's fun to, quote Shakespeare and suggest things. But the problem is not product owners. The problem is that we don't have fully engaged creative people doing our engineering. There's too much filtering in between the people building the things and the people who have the ideas. So I want to get rid of the role. I don't want to get rid of the people. Product owners, incredibly important. I don't want all that to be concentrated in one place. I want it spread out across the whole development team. And as you can see, there are profound cultural changes that probably need to take place to make that work. Because right now you're saying, I don't care, I'm too busy, it's boring, I don't want to, or maybe I'm virtuous and I want to, the rest of my team doesn't, something like that. Well, so what has to happen in your organization? If you've got managers whose job is to make sure you're doing the right thing and not doing any of the wrong things, that's a problem. Okay, that's going to kill motivation. You got to burn them down. Vacation days. You are permitted to make jokes at the American's expense. Most Americans get 2 or maybe 3 weeks, kind of at engineering level Americans, 2 or 3 weeks of vacation a year, just to make sure, and I know you guys typically get more, but you still have a count, right? Make sure you're not gone too much. Make sure you're working enough. No, got to burn that down. So if you're actually doing work that you love and are motivated to do, probably the problem is going to be convincing you to take enough time off, not keeping a little count to make sure that you don't take too much, that you're somehow trying to cheat the company. Not allowed to telecommute. Make sure you're in the right place, doing the right work so somebody can keep an eye on you. No. Do you have a sales team that can go out and execute contracts on behalf of the company that obligate the company to build certain things? Does that ever happen to you? Salespeople sell something and they're like, well, you got 2 months, you got to do it. There's a contract. And for real, you guys, there's a contract. I'd love for companies to be less hierarchical, but guess what? Your company exists within a rather rigid hierarchy, and that's whatever government has a monopoly over the land you reside in. There are courts that will enforce that contract. As I tell people in the U.S., it ends with an FBI raid if you don't do it. You don't want that. All right, there's a contract, you have to do it. So this practice of somebody obligating you legally to build something that you're not on board with building, you got to burn that down. You can't do it. All right, I want to take the people on your team, the developers of the world, I want to get out of people's way. I think we are simply the kind of creature who wants to build things, and we are motivated to make things. We just have to protect that motivation. And remember, I'm not saying I think it can work. I know it can work in at least one case. I work there. I know some other companies where it works. The question now is how to apply it in companies like yours. That can be, frankly, a difficult question. It hasn't happened in lots of other places yet, but it's happened in some. All right, now Jack Cade's revolution was ill-fated, and I think if the play is at all historically accurate, I think it was probably ill-motivated. But the revolution that we've been a part of for the last 10 years hasn't been ill-fated. It has succeeded. It's just time to look at where it's gotten us now and do the next level of re-examination to begin to explore what territory we might conquer next and what sorts of things we might be able to do with different structures and a better attention to the things that motivate us as human beings and the kind of things we simply want to do. So, explore with me. Thank you.